So in my last video, I'll admit I wasn't very subtle with my dislike of the direction Chilla's art seems to be heading as a developer. However, I've received so many recommendations for their latest games since then that it honestly made me just a little bit optimistic. The main issue I have with Chilla's Art's games is just how incredibly inconsistent they are in terms of quality. I don't blame them for trying new things in each new release. In fact, I commend them for it. But a lot of the elements they introduce just don't work. They seem very unsteady on their feet, like a newborn deerling, but where deer learn to walk almost instantly, Chilla's art still seems to be trying to find their footing after years of making games. Titles such as The Night Way Home, The Convenience Store and Yuki-Onna are all evidence of this creative instability. There's certainly an idea there, but whether it's effectively actualized or if it even fundamentally works as a game are things I don't think they spend enough time ironing out. That said, I was excited to play the next few games. It's been a while since I dipped my toes into Chilla's Art's catalogue, so it felt like more of a fresh experience. I didn't feel as bogged down by my opinions of the previous games as I might have if I'd made this video months ago. And so, the first of the games I'll be covering in this video is The Radio Station. I remembered a comment on one of my earlier Chilla's Art videos warning me that, knowing my tastes, I may have a mixed reaction to this game, and whoever that was, you know me well. The game begins with narration from the player character, Haruo, recounting his brother Masaki's mysterious death while working at the local radio station. The police weren't very useful and declared the death a suicide, yet Masaki didn't seem like he had any reason to end his life. Haruo doesn't accept the supposed cause of death and declares that he will find out what happened to his brother. It's an intriguing start to the game, and the great voice acting really draws you into the situation. You gain control in Haruo's bedroom and read a note that leads you to the location of the radio station key before picking up a flashlight. Now, I'll just get this out of the way. The flashlight fucking sucks in this game. It's probably the worst in any Chilla's Art game, as it's unbelievably ineffective. Most of the time I questioned if it was even switched on and started to consider just leaving it off and letting my eyes adjust to the darkness, which obviously isn't a feature in the game, but it would have come in handy. So, you head to retrieve the radio station key from the mailbox at the owner's house, but to do that you have to get into the truck and drive there. Oh my god, there's driving in a Chilla's Art game? Oh my god, the driving sucks in this Chilla's Art game. It's hard to describe the awful feeling of driving the truck, but the most accurate comparison I can think of is that it's a mix of this. And this. I'll expand upon my opinions of the driving later so as to not make this video too negative from the outset. When in the truck, you're given the freedom to visit each location in this quiet mountain village, so of course I completely forgot about my objective and went exploring. On my travels I happened across an old empty warehouse with nothing but multiple sets of doors to pass through, but since I couldn't figure out what to do with them, I left. I then went and grabbed the key from the mailbox and headed to the radio station. Inside you find a tape recorder on which you'll place several audio tapes that are scattered throughout the village, usually requiring you to solve a puzzle to acquire them. This is the main objective of the game, and you'll return to the radio station to play these tapes in order to progress the story. The 7 cassette tapes each play a different recording of Masaki's radio show, in which he reads out user-submitted scary stories. I thought this was a cool concept, as you get treated to even more spookiness inside a horror game, but I soon began to feel like the tapes dragged on a bit too much. Again, I'll talk more about this later. The search for the missing tapes will lead you to the vending machine area, where you find 2 tapes, one of which is found using the UV flashlight you find there. This new item that reveals previously unseen things suddenly opened up the game for me. I started thinking of everything I possibly missed at each location and immediately headed to the place that had stumped me the most, the warehouse. Here I found that one in each set of doors had a handprint on it, and if I entered them in order, a new room would appear at the end, housing a strange disappearing person and a voice recorder. I genuinely enjoyed this puzzle, and for some reason it even gave me chills. Maybe it was just the embarrassment of having gone there earlier and trying to solve whatever puzzle there was by opening every single door. Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking. Sadly, there wasn't much more use for the UV light, but I think it served its purpose as a fun puzzle device. An over-reliance on it would have probably detracted from the potential variety there could be with other puzzles. Speaking of which, the other puzzles actually aren't that interesting, so I won't bother covering them here. Plus, if anybody intends to play the game after watching this, they won't have everything spoiled for them. Now to talk about the ending. So the letters Masaki received were all sent in by someone named Toko. Their letters become more disturbing with time, and they even show signs of some sort of evil corruption. Eventually, Masaki is told by Toko to read the poem she sent in out loud, and it seems that shortly after doing so he died. You must then find the letter he read in the hopes of finding out how he died. At this point, you may also be drawn to the radio tower outside by the sound of a heartbeat. Here you witness a person's apparition commit suicide, and after climbing the tower you find the final tape. Returning to the station, you can insert the tape into the player to find out what's on it. It's a jumbled mess of noises, but thankfully the game automatically reverses the tape for you. If you play the tape again, you'll hear the letter being read aloud by your brother, before assumedly dying. Haruo takes the tape to the police as evidence, but it ends up just spreading the curse even more. And that's one of the endings. The other two are achieved by not playing the final tape. If instead you choose the letter, Haruo will read it aloud, resulting in the summoning of a malevolent spirit from the murky red water that arises from the ground. The monster reaches out to Haruo and drowns him with telekinetic powers. After this, Haruo's fiancée tries to find out how he died so mysteriously and continues the curse's cycle. If, however, you manage to find the voice recorder, Haruo will record a final message warning others to not read the darkness of Tonako poem out loud before being drowned by the spirit. This provides an explanation for his fiancée, meaning she won't investigate further, but a conversation unfolds between a group online and they end up spreading the curse regardless. I like the effort that was put into the story. It's even more interesting than I made it seem, as I didn't really get into who Toko was and why she was trying to curse people. That being said, I wish it was presented in a tighter, more concise way. The tapes are a slog to sit through, and I ended up skipping through them after 2 or 3. It ruined some of the experience, sure, but in my opinion it wasn't engaging enough for me to invest more of my time into. That, coupled with the fact that my laptop was melting from the heat it was generating trying to run this game, it makes me wish for either shorter story times or a better optimized game. Along with the tapes being a detriment to the game, I definitely think the driving was a poor inclusion. The game would have been much better if instead of the village locations being spread out requiring you to drive between them, that if everything was condensed into a single area. This would not only allow you to travel from location to location in a matter of seconds, but would also allow for the game to continue to build tension and atmosphere. Driving between locations like you're in a bumper car completely breaks the tone of the game. The foreboding ambience of the empty buildings suddenly becomes repetitive awkward revs of a past its prime engine as you try to correct yourself after crashing into a wall for the 50th time. If not for the couple of actually good scares while driving, I would have written it off as a completely unnecessary feature in the game. But since it does have those, I'll just consider it an ill thought out decision. Speaking of jump scares, I'm actually surprised to say that that's the one thing the game does amazingly. There are several that messed me up big time, and they were infrequent enough that I didn't find them frustrating in the slightest, which is almost unheard of for me. My favourite occurred when I was driving between 2 places and the car began malfunctioning. I genuinely thought this was a bug in the game, so when I turned my head to see a figure with its face pressed up against my back window, it scared the absolute holy bejesus out of me. I was in shock, like actual genuine shock from a really effective jump scare, and that made me genuinely happy. What doesn't make me happy, however, is that there really aren't any good horror elements other than the jump scares in this game. The lack of a spooky atmosphere due to having to blaze your way through the country roads in your little pickup truck really just destroys that. The puzzles were okay, the standard Chilla's art stuff really. The UV light was a fun addition though, as it makes you return to previously empty locations to see if you in fact missed something the first time. However, the space between the locations is too annoying. If you're not doing a speedrun following the most optimal route, then you're going to find the amount of driving frustrating. Exploring just isn't fun in this game. The driving quickly becomes a chore after the brief wave of, oh my god, I'm driving in a Chilla's art game, and it completely works against the assumedly intended horror atmosphere. It's a neat gimmick, but I hope it doesn't appear in any future titles. Funnily enough, Missing Children handled the multiple location situation better by just teleporting you to each location, skipping the drive entirely. I guess Chilla's art were trying to one-up themselves here, but ended up falling short. All in all, the radio station was much like most Chilla's art games. It does some things well, while being held back by strange creative choices. It's a pity how the only thing that's stopping me from ranking this among the better Chilla's art games is its key feature. Without the driving, it'd be so much more enjoyable, yet with it, it's extremely underwhelming. Every set piece is bridged by a driving segment, so all I remember doing in my 80 minutes of playtime was freaking driving. It sucks that that's the case. It really does. The Closing Shift was by far the most mentioned game in my comment section over the last few months. So many people told me how much they enjoyed it and also how much I would probably enjoy it too. It raised my expectations extremely high, so when I started playing and realised it was basically a carbon copy of the convenience store, an earlier Chilla's Art game that I wasn't very fond of, I was devastated to say the least. The closing shift begins with you leaving your apartment to drive to Chilla's Coffee, where you work as a barista. Outside you find a phone on the ground and you return it to its owner, who is searching for it near the bike racks beside your car. This guy is clearly a weirdo, but once you get to work you'll realise he's really just par for the course. Your boss is an antagonistic asshole, and the customers range from equally as rude to just plain bizarre. The surprisingly janky character animations really emphasise this as well, and I say it's surprising because we've seen Chilla's Art use much better animations in previous games, but here it looks like everyone is just shy a few lines of vital code. Contrasting the characters, however, the environments look very good. The city actually feels like a city, rather than just an amassment of textured cuboids. Now since you're a barista, that means you're tasked with making a variety of hot and cold beverage for customers, the recipes of which are all helpfully listed in the back room. This aspect of the game is something I found very challenging, because not only is my short-term memory terrible, but I also have severe anxiety when it comes to serving people in a work environment. That's a fact about myself I wasn't expecting to share today, but it's very relevant because I think it factored into the game a lot more than it might for others. Even without a countdown timer mechanic like you might find in games like Overcooked, I still found myself getting very stressed when presented with large complex orders of drinks that I barely even knew how to pronounce, let alone create from scratch. Not a single cell of my brain can distinguish between a macchiato and a latte. To me, they're just phrases recited by people whose hobby it is to spend half their wages on overpriced coffee that tastes like spicy pumpkins. This was my worst nightmare in video game form, and the horror part of the game hadn't even started yet. The game plays out much like the convenience store. You go to work each night and stave off the monotony by serving increasingly odd customers while experiencing strange events. The strange events in this game being the building threat of a stalker in the area. A stalker that seems to be targeting you in particular. You're presented with scenes at different points throughout the game that show someone watching you or looking at photos they've taken of you. Unexplainable things start happening while you're working, such as the power suddenly going out and concerning notes appearing on the tables. This all culminates in the final night when the stalker, who was the guy you gave the phone to at the start of the game, finally reveals himself mere inches away from you, stopped only by a thin veil of glass. From here the gameplay gets more interesting as you need to figure out how to deal with him. You find a way up to the roof and drop a brick on his head, killing him. Or did you? I like how it's not a supernatural antagonist in the closing shift, even though there's a lot of mentions of ghosts that will lead you to suspect otherwise. I appreciate that they tried something new here, but would have preferred if they hadn't ripped off a previous game with a very distinct gameplay style while doing it. It just makes it feel half-assed. I like how the narrative in this game develops though. You begin hearing rumours about ghosts and stalkers very early on, so you're given a choice as to which you'll try to use as a way to rationalise all the strange events. However, as the game progresses, it becomes very clear that it is indeed a mortal human that's stalking you. I would have liked a bit more ambiguity here, as I think it would have served the ending better, especially the door reveal. If it were more ambiguous, players would more likely lean into the threat being of paranormal origin, since it is of course a Chilla's Art game. Then, when it's revealed to be a very real person that's been harassing you, it would flip the whole game on its head. That would have been cool, but alas, Chilla's Art haven't hired me as their writer. There's basically no horror elements in this game apart from a few obnoxious jump scares. On one occasion the lights went out and spooky music played while mysterious dark figures came to order drinks, but nothing interesting came of this. I was expecting something a little more, horror-y, but it was again underwhelming. Speaking of underwhelming, there aren't really any puzzles in this game. All you do is serve and clean up after customers. I would have liked something to do while waiting around. Ultimately, this is more of a barista simulator than an actual horror game. If you consider making the coffee a puzzle, then I guess it's somewhat challenging. There's not really a certain order you need to follow, but that's still the only penalty for messing up. Nobody leaves and your boss doesn't scold you, you just start again while everyone retains their ungodly high amount of patience. With all this said, the most common note I made while playing was just how bored I was. You would think Chilla's Art might have learned their lesson from the convenience store and filled the playtime with something a little more engaging than just waiting for a customer, serving the customer, and then waiting for the next one. I know there's a little more to this game than just that, but honestly that's how I would sum up this experience. Like with the radio station, all the interesting moments are split up by massive swaths of uninteresting gameplay, and it makes it really frustrating when you finally reach a horror moment after pining for one through 10 plus minutes of making coffee, only for it to be a lackluster jump scare, or ooh, there's someone standing there but then oh no, he's not there anymore. I found this to be a really unenjoyable experience, not because I found it too challenging or anything, but because I feel like both my time and money were wasted. At least I have the reassurance that I can warn some viewers away from playing this game like I unfortunately did. I know this game's segment was kinda short, but I'm done talking about the closing shift now. If you'd like to know more of my thoughts on it, then go watch my convenience store review, as I'm sure most of my critiques of that are reusable here. Now let's hope the latest release, The Bathhouse, can save my plummeting opinion of Chilla's art before it smacks against the jagged floor of pure hatred. Good news, everyone. The Bathhouse isn't terrible, so that floor of hatred will just have to make do without the pitiful remains of my Chilla's art opinions splattered across its surface. Well, for now at least. As the game only just released, I feel like it's important to mention that some of its bugs and glitches may still be ironed out in future patches, so I'm willing to be a bit more lenient when it comes to the performance issues this time. However, it did run the worst out of any Chilla's art game so far, and I don't think that's something they'll be fixing. It's just the natural course of events really. An indie developer releases games and gains attention, allowing them to use the increased budget to improve their games using resources they wouldn't have had access to otherwise. This of course is fine for people who have high-end PCs that can run whatever they want, but with each new release it gets harder and harder for those with lower-end hardware to keep up. I don't blame Chilla's art for making their games in ways that require more processing speed on part of the consumer, it just sucks for me that it's part of the process, since I'm an honorary member of the Potato PC Club. However, I was able to overlook the frequent frame rate drops and my melting laptop in favour of actually making this video, so you're welcome. We'll start with the story. You play as Mina Akimura, who moves to a very remote village to escape her oppressive work environment. She's drawn to the place by an ad that promises free rent so long as you work in the local bathhouse. This sounds like a great place to restart, so she moves into a new apartment there immediately. The landlord is a complete weirdo and you can never really gauge his true intentions. Just like every landlord, I guess. You enter the new apartment and as you unload your belongings you notice a hole in the wall with a small amount of hair sticking out of it. But whatever, you pull it out and continue with your day. The bathhouse is just down the street and as you head there you're treated to a really great looking area. No, seriously, it reminded me of earlier games such as Okari and Inunaki Tunnel, which were some of my favourites. There's only one street, so there's no way you can get lost, but there's also shrine grounds if you follow some steps through some shrubs. This area looks great, and during the nighttime it's especially creepy since it's hard to distinguish between graves, lanterns and possible ghostly figures. Anyway, at the bathhouse you're quickly thrust into the job and begin serving customers. Now I know what you're thinking. Oren, don't you hate serving customers? And to that I say, yes I do. But compared to the convenience store and the closing shift, the bathhouse is far more streamlined and a lot more engaging. After a short period of handing bathers their towels and such, you do some quick cleaning before taking a bath yourself. Here is where most of the horror elements come into play. As you sit alone in the building, washing yourself, strange things will begin to occur. At first it's small things like a monkey fake out, but it gets progressively more sinister. You begin to catch glimpses of shadowy figures through the bath's haze and ominous stains attach themselves to the walls. A growing suspicion arises in you that the woman who went missing here some time ago may actually still remain here, as something else. Yet the routine continues. You wake up, pull the ever-growing clumps of hair out of the hole in your wall, go to work, then bathe amidst paranormal events. I make it sound repetitive, but it's actually paced quite well. You get enough unique encounters with other residents of the village that you're never really bored. It feels like a place that's being lived in, even if it has seen better days. During one of your later bathing sessions, you'll glance over to see a mangy figure lower itself into a nearby bath. You go to investigate and find yourself fleeing from a maelstrom of dread and despair that takes the form of the missing woman. She chases you, slowly, until there's nowhere left to run, and attacks you. You then take control of Mina's sister, Erina, who has come to the village in search of her newly missing sibling. Erina moves into the apartment next to the one her sister rented, but Mina's nowhere to be found. While she investigates, she takes up the same offer of working in the bathhouse for free rent. The game continues much like before, except you keep seeing apparitions of your sister around the place. You also discover a patch in your apartment's floor where banging can be heard underneath. Newspaper clippings expand upon the missing woman's story, and you find a note scrawled at the bottom saying "Inside the Ashes." You then take a pair of tongs to the boilers in the bathhouse and find a key that grants you access to a mysterious taped up door that has intrigued you this entire time. Inside you find a peculiar scene. Two engraved obelisks stand opposite each other in an underground chamber. A malformed figure sits beside them, confined to their wooden stocks. Notes on the ground detail the process for some sort of sick ritual that involves not only the local monk but also the landlord as his unwilling apprentice. The landlord was forced into servitude by the threat of being cursed, and not only helped with the kidnapping of the first woman, but also the leading of subsequent women to work in the bathhouse so that they would succumb to the ritual process. You cut the confined person's chains and leave to wash that disgusting situation off of yourself. As you sit down to begin, the horrific visage of the spirit appears in your mirror and the bathhouse is bathed in a deep red hue. An oddly placed timer of 5 minutes begins to count down, and you must then scramble to arrange a large amount of objects in the women's area to match the ones in the men's. This is almost impossible to do, and I don't know what happens if done correctly, so we'll move on. The spirit appears again and chases you to your apartment where it corners you. You pass out and are carried back to the ritual cavern by one of the men, but before they can sacrifice you, you're saved by the man you freed underground. Your captors go up in flames, but before you're caught in the blaze that ignites the bathhouse, you're carried outside by your savior. You watch the flames consume it from across the street, and the game ends with Elena giving her testimony to the police and wondering if she forgot anything in the village, which of course we know she did. And that's the good ending. The bad ending is achieved if you don't find the underground chamber, meaning there's no one to save you from being sacrificed. That's the one I got because I'm an idiot. I actually quite enjoyed the Bathhouse. It's certainly one of the best Chilla's Ark games in my opinion. The story is probably the most gripping so far, and it's integrated into gameplay almost seamlessly. Throughout the game you really do get the feeling that you shouldn't be in that village. It has a deeply rooted, disquieting atmosphere, something that can't just be dispelled with good vibes and happy feelings. It draws in hopeful youth and punishes it indiscriminately. It reminds me of classic horror films about a protagonist moving to a small remote town and being tormented by the strange individuals that dwell there. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a cut scene where some rickety old man warned Mina not to go near the town before the game started. I'm glad the setting was just one street. It condenses gameplay, making it a more solid, concise experience. The village population all have something a little off about them, which makes sense going by what the cop says in the end. From the overly persuasive landlord to the mother who pushed her son's hand into the fan, they all service the village's eerie vibe perfectly. Thankfully, there's no unfittingly goofy characters that would ruin the tone. Well, maybe except for the Potato Man, but he's honestly not that bad compared to characters in previous games. His potato quiz is the immersion breaking thing, because unless you actually have some potato knowledge, you'll be repeatedly cycling through his dialogue trying to guess the right answer. It's dumb and annoying, but the man himself is fine, and his calls that echo through the town are chilling in their own way. The visuals are really nice. The bathhouse in particular looks great, and it's such a unique location to set a horror story in. The constant sound of flowing water gives the bathhouse a sort of false sense of life, like a ghost that disguises itself as a living being to walk among others. Only after taking a hard look at it do you realise it's not what it seems, and that spectral facade falls quickly. I love how the mist from the baths gives the area a sort of ethereal quality. It acts as a veil between what you can see before you and what you think you can see beyond it. This makes you second guess your vision a lot, as it molds everyday objects into possible paranormal phenomena. Now, although the environments looked great, the character models did not. I know it's kind of a custom for Chilla's Ark characters to look fucked up, but in the bathhouse they all have this weird shadow over the top of their head, which just looks terrible, especially when they're standing directly under light. It's probably to signify that they're under the influence of dark powers like in Ju on the Grudge, but I don't think it works as it is. The actual antagonist, however, looked amazing, and I really enjoyed the intense chase moments with her. The burning red combined with the chaotic flickering of her ghostly form was very exciting to witness and flee from. I can't recall anything else in a Chilla's Ark game that had this much energy, so it was a delight here. I do miss the more subtle horror of earlier games though. The only good moments here were when the ghost sinks into the bathwater and when she appears in your doorframe. However, both were immediately followed up by obnoxiously loud jump scares, so yeah. The puzzles weren't too bad to be honest, although they're nothing special. If anything, I'm glad that they were the typical basic type of puzzles Chilla's Ark usually implement instead of something weird and logically unsolvable. The increased focus on puzzles improved the experience a lot, as they suit a game like this much more than the customer service element does. I do also have a few random critiques though. I hate the timed puzzle. It's ridiculously difficult because unless you have a really good memory, by the time you return to the women's side you've already forgotten the exact locations of where you need to place things. It's challenging, sure, but to an unfair extent. It also doesn't help that it might take you a couple of minutes to even figure out what the puzzle is. I like how you can set the mood of the bathhouse via the jukebox. All the tracks are fairly similar, but it gives the players the option of what music they want to be spooked to. However, the music still cuts off abruptly when you exit the room, and I don't understand how that's still an issue. I don't have a whole lot of game development experience under my belt, but I feel like it could be solved by using a radial type emitter for the audio that fades with increased distance from the object rather than tying the audio to specific areas completely. I also, and I know this is kind of nitpicky, but I also don't understand the placement of the apartment 203 key in the bathhouse. I searched the entire village for whatever it was I was missing to progress the story and was shocked and frustrated to discover when I watched someone else's gameplay that I had missed a tiny key tucked away in some random corner of the bathhouse. As far as I'm aware, there's no indication that it's even there, so what the hell am I supposed to do other than wander around searching for ages until I finally find it? It really just feels like a way to increase people's playtime so that they exceed the 2-hour mark and can't get a refund. And speaking of shady practices, before even starting the game I noticed that one of the unlockable trophies is rewarded for finding all of the bonus Patreon content. If you've watched my previous Chilla's art videos, you'd know how I feel about their inclusion of Patreon reward items, but I think this is the most disgusting thing they've done so far. Making that trophy a reward for collecting all of the Patreon content incentivizes people to play with the supporter content switched on, which I do not because it usually ruins the horror experience. Playing with the content on and making people go out of their way to collect everything further incentivizes people to become patrons themselves, because by simply making people aware that the Patreon rewards exist, it increases the amount of potential patrons that will be lured in after playing the game. I haven't had that much problem with it in the past, but making the exposure to Patreon rewards mandatory to unlock a trophy just seems like greedy practice to me. I'm kind of glad that this is most likely the last Chilla's Art game I'll cover, because now the series went out on somewhat of a high note. In my opinion, the quality of their games has been on an unsteady yet constant decline, and they don't seem to be worth the money to me anymore. I know that's an unpopular opinion because it seems like absolutely everybody loves these games, but maybe it's because nobody else seems to really analyze them like I've been doing for the past year. If what people want is a short, cheap horror game that will make them jump and scream in their seats so that they can get a catchy YouTube thumbnail, then that's fine. They can do whatever they want. But that's not what I look for in these games. At the start, I was enamored with the creative Japanese themed horror games that had this unique VHS tape aesthetic that really appealed to the nostalgic 90s kid in me. It was such a perfect concept to me, and I made sure to express that in my earlier reviews. Yet as time went on, blemishes started to show. The gameplay became stale and was sometimes downright broken. It seemed like corners were being cut by the devs, possibly so that they could maintain the phenomenal momentum they'd amassed with their earlier hits like Inunaki Tunnel and Stigmatized Property. Maybe releasing 5 to 6 games a year became too much to handle without making some sacrifices. In 2022, however, they've only released 2 games, and with the Bathhouse being one of them, it makes me hope that they're beginning to prioritize quality games over a quantity of games. As much as I criticize these games and the practices of those who make them, I am really grateful for their existence. I honestly never could have imagined that my series where I review short indie horror games could have become the most watched videos on my channel, far surpassing anything I'd made before in terms of views and interaction. I'm not a big channel, clearly, but I'm incredibly proud of everything I've created, and I'm even more thankful for the small community that engages with the content that I put so much effort into. It makes me so happy when people comment saying that they found my videos useful, and I've received a lot of those on my Chilla's Art videos. I've helped some people decide both to buy or not to buy these games, and it makes everything I do here worth it to know that I was useful in some way. But yeah, I've probably rambled for long enough here. I just wanted to say that I appreciate everyone who's watched, commented on, liked and shared my videos. It really means a lot to me. And hey, feel free to keep recommending newer Chilla's Art games to me. Who knows if I'll ever get a new laptop and pick up the series where I left it. Thanks for watching.